Can I have this before you throw it out? The voice was barely audible over the noise of the Saturday lunch crowd. Evelyn Marsh heard it anyway. She always had good ears, even now at 53, even after everything. She looked up from her half-eaten plate of salmon and saw a young woman standing at the edge of the patio, holding a black garbage bag over one shoulder, her clothes stiff with dried mud, her eyes fixed on the breadbasket Evelyn had already pushed to the side. The restaurant, Greystone Terrace, the kind of place where the waitstaff refold your napkin when you stand up, had gone slightly quiet around that table, not completely. People are polite enough not to stop talking entirely. But Evelyn felt the attention shift the way you feel a cold draft before you see the open window. She looked at the young woman for a moment, maybe 26, 27. Dark hair pulled back with what looked like a rubber band, a fading bruise along her left jawline, the kind that's greenish-yellow and almost gone but not quite. Her eyes were brown and direct, and she didn't look away when Evelyn met them. "I wasn't going to throw it out," Evelyn said. "I was going to take it home." The young woman's jaw tightened. "Okay, I'm sorry." She started to turn and Evelyn said without knowing she was going to, "Sit down." The young woman turned back. The wariness in her face was so complete, so practiced that it wasn't even defensive anymore. It was just her face's resting position. The position of someone who has been disappointed so many times that hope no longer even registers as a separate emotion. "I'm not a charity case," she said. "I didn't say you were. I said sit down. I have more food than I need and I'm tired of eating alone on Saturdays." That last part slipped out more honestly than Evelyn intended. She watched the young woman calculate something, danger, sincerity, the odds. And then she sat down across the table with the posture of someone prepared to stand back up immediately. Her name was Petra. She offered it only after the waiter brought another glass of water, unprompted, and Petra thanked him quietly. And without the embarrassment Evelyn half expected. There was a dignity to her that sat oddly against the condition of her clothes. And Evelyn found herself paying attention in a way she hadn't paid attention to anyone in a long time. Petra had been sleeping in her car for 6 weeks, she said. The car was a 2009 Civic with a cracked rear window, and the registration was expired and she was parked 3 blocks away, because she'd figured out that the parking enforcement officers on this street didn't work Saturdays. She said all of this flatly, as if reporting on someone else's situation. "Where are you from?" Evelyn asked. "Kellerton." Evelyn set down her fork. Kellerton was a town 40 miles north of here. It was also the town where Evelyn had been born, where she'd lived the first 19 years of her life. Before her father's company collapsed and her parents sold the house, and her mother moved to Phoenix, and her father moved into a bottle, and Evelyn had put herself through college and never looked back. "That's a specific coincidence," Evelyn said. "Most things are specific," Petra said, and Evelyn almost smiled. They talked through the rest of the meal. Evelyn learned that Petra had grown up in the Kellerton foster system, that she'd aged out at 18 with a duffel bag, and a list of resources that were mostly closed or underfunded, that she'd had a job at a distribution warehouse until the warehouse was bought by a larger company and restructured, and she was in the bottom tier of everyone they let go. She'd been in the city 4 months. The car was the last thing she had. What Evelyn did not say, what she sat with quietly through the tiramisu she ordered and Petra ate with careful, deliberate gratitude, was that she recognized something. Not Petra's face, not her name. Something in the way Petra held a coffee cup with both hands. Something in the line of her nose when she turned toward the street. Evelyn paid the bill and did not make a production of it. She gave Petra her card, the personal one, with just her name and cell number, and said if Petra needed a reference for an apartment application or a job, she could call. Petra looked at the card for a long time. Why? Evelyn thought about giving a comfortable answer. She had many of those available. She'd been giving comfortable answers for 30 years. In board meetings and charity galas and the kind of dinner parties where the conversation stays on the surface of everything. Because everyone's afraid of what's underneath. "Because you asked for bread instead of money," she said, "and you thanked the waiter." She drove home with the radio off. Her house was a colonial on Ashford Lane, 11 rooms, 4 of which she used. She'd bought it with her ex-husband Thomas 8 years ago, when things were still good, or when she'd still believed they were, which is a distinction she'd only learned to make in the years since. Thomas had taken the apartment in Chicago, and a meaningful percentage of her patients when they divorced, and Evelyn had kept the house and the company. Marsh Capital, which she'd built before she met him and would outlast whatever came next. She stood in her kitchen that night, and did not call her daughter. Her daughter, Lily Marsh, was 22 and living in Boston, and they were in one of their periodic silences that felt, more and more like a permanent condition. This one had started over Christmas, when Evelyn had said something at dinner that she'd meant as practical and Lily had received as cruel, and neither of them had found their way back from it, yet. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the garden she didn't use and thought about Kellerton. She had not been back to Kellerton in over 30 years. Her mother was dead, her father was dead, there was no one left who remembered her there, which had always felt like a mercy. The kind of town that's small, the kind of family that visible when it falls apart. You don't go back, you move forward. That's the whole strategy. She had a half-brother. Had Elliot Thorne. Her father's son from the woman he'd started seeing the year the company went under. A detail Evelyn had only learned at her father's funeral from a lawyer reading a will that left nothing because there was nothing to leave. Elliot would be 40 now. She'd never met him. The lawyer had given her an address that was probably outdated and she'd put it in a drawer and not opened the drawer. She thought about Petra's hands around that coffee cup. She went to bed and told herself it was nothing. Petra called 11 days later. Not for help, she said quickly. She'd found a room to rent, cash weekly, not ideal but stable. She'd found work, evening shifts at a hotel laundry facility downtown. She'd called because she wanted to return the card. She didn't want to owe anyone. You don't owe me anything, Evelyn said. I know. I just don't like loose ends. Then keep the card, Evelyn said. Consider it closed. A pause. Then that's actually a fair way to think about it. They talked for 22 minutes. Evelyn knew because she checked afterward the way you check something you're not sure you should be doing. Petra was direct and unsentimental and occasionally very funny in a way that appeared to surprise even her. A small flicker of wry humor that showed up and then got quickly suppressed, as if she didn't trust it. They started talking every few days. Evelyn told herself it was mentorship. She'd done mentorship before, through a nonprofit she sat on the board of, and this felt different in a way she kept not examining. She hired a private investigator 6 weeks after the lunch at Greystone Terrace. His name was Dennis Rourke and he was 60 and former law enforcement. And he didn't ask her why she wanted him to pull records from Kellerton County's Department of Social Services circa 1998. You understand these aren't easy to access, he said. I understand you'll figure it out, Evelyn said. He called her back in 2 weeks. She was in her office on the 4th floor of the Marsh Capitol building, looking at the city through floor-to-ceiling glass, when her cell rang. I found the file, Dennis said. The child in question was brought into the foster system in Kellerton County in March of 1998. She was approximately 6 months old. The intake form lists the reason for removal as parental abandonment. Evelyn's hand tightened on the phone. Name on the intake form, no name for the infant. She was designated Jane Doe and given a case name of baby Kellerton. The foster family who took her initially was the Galloway family. She was eventually placed long-term with a family named Voss, who registered her as Petra and assigned the surname from their case file. She aged out of the system in 2016. Parental abandonment, Evelyn said. Does the file say anything about the parents? A pause. There's a notation referencing an investigation that was subsequently closed. The biological mother was listed as unknown at time of intake. There's a sealed portion of the file that I can't access without a court order. Another pause. This one longer. The child wasn't brought in from a hospital, she was found. The room was very quiet. Found where? Evelyn said. A parking lot. Behind the Kellerton Public Library. A woman named Helen Marsh found her in a cardboard box. Evelyn sat down, which she had not planned to do. Helen Marsh was her mother. She didn't call Petra that night. She sat in her house on Ashford Lane with a glass of wine she didn't drink and tried to reconstruct something. A timeline, a logic, an explanation that made sense of what she was looking at. Her mother had never told her. Her mother had found a baby in a parking lot and never said a single word. Her mother had called the authorities. Because that's the kind of woman she was. The kind who does the correct thing with a clean conscience and goes home and sleeps, and never mentioned it again, not to Evelyn, not to anyone, as far as Evelyn knew. But why would she? It was 1998. Evelyn was already gone by then, already in college, already building the distance. Her parents' marriage was disintegrating. Her mother's attention was elsewhere. You find a baby, you call the county, you go on with your life, except. Evelyn was 23 in 1998. She'd had a brief relationship. The word felt pale against what it had actually been. With a man named Graham Elford the previous year. Graham Elford, who was charming and brilliant and had a way of making you feel like the most important person in any room he was in. Right up until the moment you weren't. The relationship had ended badly. Evelyn had left. She had never told Graham what she'd suspected, and then confirmed 3 weeks after she walked out. She had called her mother from a payphone in her dorm building. The conversation had lasted 11 minutes. She remembered it in fragments. Her mother's voice, careful and controlled, the word unfortunate. The phrase take care of it, which she had meant practically and Evelyn had received as an instruction. The silence between them afterward that had never fully closed. She had lost the pregnancy at 8 weeks. That's what she had believed. Her doctor at the time, a man named Carlisle, she remembered, efficient and impersonal, had confirmed it. She had grieved in private and moved forward because moving forward was the whole strategy. Petra was born in September 1997. The math was not complicated. She pressed her palm flat on the kitchen table and breathed. She needed to be wrong. She needed this to be a coincidence and an overactive pattern-seeking mind and the kind of wishful thinking that makes lonely people see connections that don't exist. She needed to call Dennis Rourke and tell him to pull the sealed portion of that file. But first she needed to know one thing. She called her half-brother. Elliot Thorne picked up on the third ring. He had a low voice, unhurried, and when she introduced herself there was a silence that might have been recognition or might have been shock. "I wondered if you'd ever call," he said. "I wondered the same thing. What do you need?" She liked that he went straight to it. It was a family trait apparently. She asked him if he knew anything about the end of their father's time in Kellerton the last years. Whether their father had ever talked about Evelyn's relationship with Graham Elford. Whether their father had ever mentioned a child. Another silence. Longer. "How much do you know?" Elliot asked. "Enough to need the rest." He talked for a long time. She listened. Outside the neighborhood was quiet. Ashford Lane at 10 at night. One car passing every few minutes, the distant sound of someone's sprinkler system. What Elliot told her was this. Graham Elford had come to their father after Evelyn left. Graham had told their father that Evelyn was pregnant and had refused to acknowledge it. He'd framed it as abandonment. Evelyn abandoning a child, destroying a family, running. Their father, who was by then in serious financial trouble and drinking heavily and deeply susceptible to anyone who came to him with a grievance against the world, had believed it, or had wanted to believe it. He had given Graham Elford information. Evelyn's address, her phone number, the name of her doctor. What did Graham do with it? Evelyn said. "I don't know everything," Elliot said. "But I know Dad blamed himself later. Before he died, he told me there was something he'd done that he couldn't undo and he didn't want to explain it because there was no explanation good enough." Evelyn's hand tightened on the phone. A child who should have been hers, delivered early and surrendered to a parking lot, a county file, a case name, a foster family, a rubber band and a cracked rear window, and a life that should have been completely different. She said goodbye to Elliot and sat for a long time in the kitchen. Then she picked up the phone and called Dennis Rourke. "Get me the sealed portion of that file," she said. "Whatever it takes." It took 3 weeks and a court order, and Dennis working a connection at the county clerk's office, and Evelyn's attorney making a formal petition under a provision that allowed biological parents to access records in certain circumstances. She had submitted to a DNA test without telling Petra why. The results came back on a Thursday morning in April, and Evelyn read them in her car in the parking garage under the Marsh Capitol building. Because she didn't want to be in her office when she read them. She sat there for a long time with the paper in her hands. Then she drove to the hotel laundry facility on Clement Street where Petra worked evening shifts. She waited in the parking lot until the shift change at 11. She watched the employees file out, and then Petra came through the side door with her coat already on, her bag across her chest, her head down against the wind coming off the street. Evelyn got out of the car. Petra stopped. "Mrs. Marsh, Evelyn." Petra looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at the folder in Evelyn's hand. Something in her expression shifted. Not dramatically, not a Hollywood-style realization. It was something quieter, a stillness that was more unsettling than any reaction would have been. "What's that?" Petra said. It wasn't quite a question. "Something I need to show you. Something I need to tell you." Evelyn paused. Her throat was tight and she didn't have a prepared speech because she'd known a prepared speech would fail her. "I need you to know that I didn't know. I need you to understand that first before anything else." Petra was still looking at the folder. "What did you not know?" she said very quietly. Evelyn handed her the folder. They sat in Evelyn's car for 2 hours. The parking lot emptied around them. Petra read the document slowly, the intake record, the DNA results, the sealed report that had been buried under procedural language for 26 years, and she did not cry. Her eyes went glassy once, briefly, and then she straightened her shoulders and kept reading. When she finished she set the folder on her knees and looked out the windshield. "Graham Elford," she said. "Yes, he's still alive? He lives in Scottsdale. He runs a financial consulting firm. He's been married twice." Petra was quiet for a moment. What did he actually do, specifically? Evelyn had spent considerable time with Dennis Rourke reconstructing this. "He knew I was going to have you. He went to my father, who was in bad shape by then and not thinking clearly, and told him I'd abandoned a pregnancy. My father gave him access to my medical records, or he got that access some other way. My doctor at the time told me I'd miscarried. I believe now that I didn't miscarry." She stopped, started again. "I believe Graham arranged for you to be delivered early before I knew what was happening. I believe someone, possibly the doctor, possibly someone else, was paid to tell me something that wasn't true. And I believe Graham didn't want you either. He just didn't want me to have anything." The silence was complete. "That's not fatherly devotion," Petra said. "No, that's cruelty." "Yes." Petra looked at the folder again. Then she looked at Evelyn and for the first time her expression was unguarded. Not warm yet, not ready for that, but open in a way that cost her something. "I don't know what you want from me," Petra said. "Nothing," Evelyn said. "I don't want anything from you. I want to tell you the truth and let you do whatever you need to do with it. I want you to know that what happened to you was not because you weren't wanted." Petra looked away. "I've been not wanted my whole life," she said quietly. "I'm used to it." "I know. I'm sorry." A long pause. "You found me in a restaurant," Petra said. "You found me," Evelyn said. I was sitting there being invisible and you asked me a direct question. Something crossed Petra's face that might eventually become a smile. Not yet, but the shape of one. The next months were not simple. Nothing about this was the clean reunion of a story that knows its own resolution. Petra did not move in, she did not call Evelyn mom. She kept her job at the laundry facility for 2 more months while she thought. And Evelyn gave her space that cost Evelyn considerably because she had waited 26 years and was not naturally a patient person. They had dinners. Uncomfortable at first, then less so. Evelyn discovered that Petra was meticulous about small things. The way she arranged her coat before sitting down. The way she read a menu thoroughly rather than scanning it. And that this was a survival habit that had never been trained out of her. Evelyn recognized it the way you recognize a dialect from a place you once lived. Lily came home in June. The silence between them, still half intact, and Evelyn told her carefully and without dramatic framing what she had learned. Lily sat very still and then asked to meet Petra, and Evelyn called Petra and said Lily would like to meet you, and Petra said okay. The first meeting was at Evelyn's house on a Sunday afternoon. Evelyn stayed in the kitchen for most of it, out of instinct, giving them the room, and through the wall she could hear them talking, occasionally hear Lily laugh, and Lily had her father's laugh, loud and uncomplicated, and at one point Evelyn heard Petra laugh too, a sound that was startled and then genuine and not suppressed at all. She stood at the kitchen counter with her eyes closed and let herself feel it. The matter of Graham Elford took longer. Dennis Rourke built the evidentiary file over 4 months. Dr. Carlisle had died in 2011, which complicated the medical records piece, but he'd had a nurse practitioner in his office, whose records were less neatly buried, and Dennis found her in Phoenix, retired, still clear-headed, carrying 26 years of something that had looked like guilt to her face when Dennis showed her the intake form. She signed a statement. Graham Elford's consulting firm had 3 business partners and 17 clients, including 2 municipal contracts. When Evelyn's attorney contacted his attorneys, the civil suit was filed in October. Evelyn did not attend the first round of depositions. She let her legal team handle it, the way she handled most things she could afford to delegate. But she attended the hearing in March. Graham Elford was 61 and still had the face of someone accustomed to being believed. He sat across the courtroom in a suit that cost more than Petra's monthly rent had been for years, and he watched the proceedings with the controlled expression of a man who had calculated the odds and remained confident in his position. He looked at Evelyn once. She held his gaze without expression. She had learned long ago, in board meetings and negotiations in the years since Thomas, how to make her face entirely unreadable. The judge ruled in Evelyn's favor on all 3 counts. The civil judgment included compensatory damages that Dennis characterized as significant and Evelyn characterized as insufficient, because there is no adequate number for 26 years. But it was a number that would end Graham Elford's professional reputation and require the liquidation of considerable assets. And she accepted it. On the courthouse steps, Petra stood beside her in a gray coat, not touching but close. "Is it enough?" Petra asked. "No," she said, "but it's real, and real is what we have." Petra nodded. "I looked up Kellerton last week," she said. "I've never been back. I want to go see where your mother found me." "Our grandmother," Evelyn said, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, that's too fast." "No," Petra said after a moment. "That's what she was." They stood on the courthouse steps in the pale March light, the city moving around them indifferent and enormous, and Evelyn thought about the parking lot behind the Kellerton Public Library, which she hadn't seen in 33 years, and which must have looked, in the early morning of a September day in 1997, impossibly cold for a thing so small. Evelyn said, "When it's warmer." Petra pulled her coat tighter. "I'd like that." The city went on around them. A bus went past. Someone was selling flowers from a cart at the corner, yellow ones, which had always been Evelyn's mother's favorite, a detail she hadn't thought of in years and found she could think of now without the old familiar flinch. Some things you carry long enough, they stop a aisle of fun like, wait, they just feel like you.